I always thought loyalty would be rewarded. That's what they tell you, isn't it? Put in the hours, excel at your job, be the reliable one, and eventually, you'll get what you deserve. I spent 7 years believing that at Meridian Technologies, working my way up from junior developer to lead software architect. The company had grown from a scrappy startup with 20 employees to a respected firm with offices in 3 cities, and I'd been there through it all. My moment of awakening came during the Morrison project. We'd landed a contract with Morrison Industries, a Fortune 500 company that would put us on the map. The project was massive, a complete overhaul of their inventory management system with a timeline that made everyone nervous. Daniel, our CEO, had promised delivery in 6 months, which the entire development team knew was borderline impossible. "Sarah, I need you to lead this," Daniel said during our kickoff meeting. "You're the only one who can make this work." His confidence in me was flattering, but I recognized it for what it was, a burden being placed squarely on my shoulders. Still, I accepted. This could be my path to the director position I'd been eyeing for years. For months, I lived and breathed the Morrison project. I arrived before dawn and left well after dark. I canceled vacations, missed my sister's graduation, and postponed dinner plans so many times that my friends stopped calling. My team was burning out, but I kept pushing, fueled by Daniel's constant reminders of how important this was for the company's future. 4 months in, we hit a critical technical roadblock. The legacy system at Morrison used proprietary protocols that weren't documented anywhere. I spent weeks reverse engineering the system, eventually creating a solution that not only worked, but improved efficiency by 30%. "This is brilliant," Daniel said when I demonstrated it. "Absolutely brilliant. Morrison is going to love this." 2 weeks before the deadline, I overheard a conversation that wasn't meant for my ears. I was heading to the break room when I noticed Daniel's door slightly ajar. Inside, he was talking with Jason, the new VP of development who'd been hired from a competitor 6 months ago. "The Morrison demo is tomorrow," Daniel was saying. "Are you prepared?" "More than prepared," Jason replied confidently. "I've reviewed all the documentation and rehearsed the presentation. They'll be impressed." "Good. This is a huge opportunity for you. Landing this contract permanently will fast-track your promotion to CTO." I stopped cold. CTO? The position I'd been working toward for years was being handed to Jason, who hadn't written a single line of code for the project? "What about Sarah?" Jason asked. "She's expecting to present." Daniel's laugh was dismissive. "Sarah is a technical genius, but she lacks executive presence. Morrison needs to see someone who looks the part, someone they can golf with, someone who speaks their language. Besides, she's too valuable where she is. We can't promote her out of development. She's the backbone of the team." I backed away from the door, my mind reeling. 7 years of loyalty, of sacrificed weekends and holidays, of solving problems no one else could solve. And I was still just a workhorse, valuable only for what I could produce, not for what I could become. That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table until sunrise, staring at my laptop, replaying every moment I'd dismissed my intuition telling me something wasn't right. The times my ideas were attributed to male colleagues in meetings. The promotions that went to less qualified but more presentable team members. The way Daniel always emphasized my technical skills, but never my leadership potential. By morning, I knew what I had to do. The Morrison presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m. I would be there, but not in the role they expected. Something had fundamentally changed in me. The loyal employee who put the company first had vanished overnight, replaced by someone I hardly recognized, someone who finally understood her worth. I arrived at the office earlier than usual, calm in a way that surprised even me. The storm of emotions from the previous night had settled into a cold clarity. I reviewed my notes one last time and made a few adjustments to the presentation, materials. Then I waited. The Morrison team arrived precisely at 10. 5 executives in tailored suits led by their CIO, Rebecca Winters. I'd spoken with Rebecca several times during the development process, and she'd always been direct and technically astute. Daniel and Jason greeted them in the lobby with handshakes and corporate platitudes, then led them to our main conference room. I followed silently, taking a seat at the far end of the table. Daniel's eyes flickered toward me with mild surprise. I wasn't scheduled to be part of this meeting, but he continued his welcome speech without missing a beat. Morrison Industries has been looking for a solution like this for years, he was saying, and Meridian is uniquely positioned to deliver it. I'd like to introduce Jason Parker, our VP of Development, who will walk you through what we've created. Jason stood and moved to the front of the room with practiced confidence. He clicked through the introductory slides I'd prepared, speaking broadly about innovation and strategic partnerships. The Morrison executives nodded politely, but I could see Rebecca checking her watch. "Let's get to the actual system," she said, interrupting Jason mid-sentence. "How does it interface with our legacy protocols?" Jason hesitated, just for a second. "It's a proprietary solution we've developed specifically for Morrison," he said, fumbling to find the technical slides. "It essentially creates a translation layer between the systems." Rebecca frowned. "Can you be more specific? What architecture did you use to overcome the authentication challenges?" The room went quiet. Jason looked at Daniel, who cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should bring in our technical lead to address these specific questions," Daniel suggested, his eyes finding me at the end of the table. "Sarah, would you mind?" I stood up slowly. "Actually, I've prepared a demonstration that might answer your questions more efficiently." Without waiting for permission, I connected my laptop to the projector and opened my terminal window. "The Morrison system presented unique challenges," I began, feeling strangely detached from my own voice. "The legacy protocols weren't documented anywhere, so I had to reverse engineer them. What we discovered was that the authentication system used an unusual encryption method that couldn't be interfaced with modern protocols directly." I pulled up a diagram I'd created and walked through the solution, step by step. I showed them the code I'd written, explained the architectural decisions, and demonstrated how the new system would integrate seamlessly with their existing infrastructure. When I finished the technical explanation, I switched to performance metrics. This approach reduces inventory reconciliation time by 64% and cuts error rates by nearly 80%, I concluded. But the most significant advantage is scalability. The system can handle 10 times your current transaction volume without degradation. Rebecca was leaning forward, engaged. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," she said. "Who else worked on this solution with you?" "I led the architecture and core development," I replied. "My team handled specific modules under my direction, but the integration solution was my work." "Impressive," she said, turning to Daniel. "Your technical team is exceptional." Daniel nodded, his smile tight. "Sarah is one of our most valuable assets." "I can see why," Rebecca said. She handed me her business card. "I'd like to continue this conversation. There are a few additional requirements we might want to discuss." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of handshakes and promises. When the Morrison team left, Daniel closed the conference room door and turned to me. "That was unprofessional," he said, his voice low. "We had a plan for this presentation." "A plan that didn't include the person who actually built the system," I replied. "A plan to present my work as Jason's achievement so you could justify promoting him to CTO." Daniel's face flushed. "I don't know what you think you heard." "I heard everything," I cut in. "Last night, your door was open." The room fell silent. Jason looked at his shoes. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, recalibrating. "Sarah, you're a valuable member of this team," he finally said. "But there are considerations for executive positions that go beyond technical prowess. Jason has experience managing client relationships at this level." "So do I said. "I've been managing the Morrison relationship for months. Rebecca called me directly whenever there were technical questions." "That's different," Daniel insisted. "Executive presence is a convenient excuse," I finished for him. "I just demonstrated plenty of executive presence to the client who's about to sign your biggest contract ever. And now they know exactly who built their system. I gathered my laptop and notes. The strange calm that had carried me through the morning was beginning to fade, replaced by a trembling uncertainty about what I'd just done. But there was no going back now. Rebecca asked me to call her this afternoon, I said as I headed for the door. I'll update you after I speak with her. I called Rebecca that afternoon from a coffee shop 3 blocks away from the office. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed, the adrenaline from the morning's confrontation finally wearing off. What had I done? 7 years of careful career building potentially destroyed in one reckless morning. Sarah, I was hoping you'd call, Rebecca answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm, not at all what I expected after my impromptu takeover of the presentation. I wanted to follow up on your questions about the system, I said, trying to sound professional despite the emotional turmoil brewing inside me. Yes, but first I have to say how impressed I was with your work, she replied. Not just the technical solution, which is exceptional, but the way you presented it. Clear, confident, no unnecessary jargon. Exactly what we look for. I swallowed. Hard. Thank you. I'm curious, though, she continued, her tone shifting slightly. You're clearly the brain behind this project, yet your CEO seemed intent on keeping you in the background. Is there something I should know about the stability of Meridian's team? The question hung in the air. This was my moment to either preserve my professional reputation by smoothing things over, or to burn a bridge that might be impossible to rebuild. I took a deep breath. Meridian is going through some internal restructuring, I offered carefully. There are different visions for the company's future. I see. Rebecca paused. And where do you fit in those visions? That's something I'm reassessing, I admitted. Another pause, longer this time. Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. Morrison needs this system, and we need the person who built it to ensure its success. Your company's internal politics are concerning to me. What would you think about coming to work for Morrison directly? We've been expanding our internal development team, and someone with your skills would be an asset. My coffee sat untouched, growing cold as the implications of her offer sank in. Leave Meridian? After 7 years? The thought had never seriously crossed my mind until last night. I appreciate the offer, I said slowly, but I'd need to think about it. Of course, it's a big decision. She sounded understanding. In the meantime, we still want to move forward with the system you've built. But I want you involved in every step of the implementation, regardless of how Meridian structures the project team. That's non-negotiable for us. After we hung up, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, watching people come and go, my mind racing with possibilities I'd never considered before. By the time I returned to the office, it was late afternoon. Daniel was waiting for me at my desk. We need to talk, he said, gesturing toward a small conference room. Inside, he closed the door and sat across from me. The friendly mask he typically wore had fallen away, revealing the calculating businessman beneath. Morrison called, he said flatly. They want you to lead the implementation personally. They've made it a condition of signing the contract. I nodded but said nothing. What exactly did you say to them after the meeting? He asked, leaning forward. Nothing they didn't already see for themselves, I replied. They asked questions. I answered honestly. Daniel's jaw tightened. Sarah, I understand you felt slighted this morning, but taking your frustrations to the client was unprofessional and could have jeopardized this deal. I didn't take anything to the client, I said, feeling a flicker of anger. You brought the client to a meeting where you planned to misrepresent who did the work. The truth became obvious when technical questions were asked. That's not my fault. He sighed, changing tactics. Look, you're valuable to this company. Maybe we've overlooked your contributions at times, but that doesn't mean we don't appreciate you. Tell me what you want, and we'll make it happen. A raise? More resources for your team? The offer hung in the air between us. A week ago, it might have been enough. Today, it felt hollow. What about the CTO position? I asked directly. Daniel hesitated, just a fraction too long. That's something we could discuss for the future, certainly, but Jason brings specific experience that I don't have because you never gave me the opportunity to gain it. I finished for him. You can't claim to value my contributions while simultaneously ensuring I remain in a position where I can't grow beyond them. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. We both knew the conversation had reached an impasse. I need some time to think, I finally said, standing up. I'll continue working on the Morrison implementation for now. He nodded, relief crossing his features. Take the weekend. We'll talk more on Monday. I walked back to my desk, packed up my things and headed home. The weight of possibility pressed against my chest. Not just the offer from Morrison, but the realization that for the first time in 7 years, I was truly considering a future beyond Meridian's walls. That night I called my sister, the one whose graduation I'd missed for a project deadline. What would you do? I asked after explaining the situation. The better question is, what do you want? She replied. Not what Meridian wants from you, not what's safest or most expected. What do you actually want for yourself? As the question lingered in my mind, I realized I hadn't asked myself that in a very long time. Saturday morning greeted me with unexpected clarity. I woke before my alarm, made coffee, and sat on my small balcony overlooking the city that was just beginning to stir. For the first time in years, I had no urgent deadline hanging over me, no emergency fixes to implement, no weekend work session scheduled. The sudden absence of pressure felt disorienting, like stepping off a treadmill after running for hours. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason. Can we talk? Not about work, just coffee. I stared at it for a long moment before responding with an address of a cafe near the park, far from our usual haunts. He was already there when I arrived, 2 coffees on the table. The awkwardness between us was palpable as I sat down. I wanted to apologize, he began, surprising me. I should have pushed back when Daniel suggested I present your work. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. Would you have pushed back if I hadn't walked in? He looked down. Honestly, probably not, and that's what I need to apologize for. The admission hung between us, at least he wasn't denying it. Why did you take this job, Jason? I asked suddenly. You had a VP position at Westfield. Why come to a smaller company like Meridian? He seemed startled by the question. Daniel promised me the CTO role within a year, said the current technical team was brilliant but lacked leadership vision. He winced as the words left his mouth. I see now how that sounds. It sounds exactly like what happened. I said quietly, you're not telling me anything I haven't already figured out. For what it's worth, after seeing you work these past months, I don't agree with his assessment. You're twice the architect I ever was, and the team respects you in a way they never will me. I studied his face, searching for insincerity but finding none. Then why go along with it? Career momentum, he admitted. Once you're on the executive track, taking a step backward feels like failure. I spent 10 years climbing the ladder at Westfield, making the right connections, playing the game. Coming to Meridian was supposed to be my final step to the C-suite. He shook his head. But I've been miserable since I got here. Everyone knows I don't have the technical chops to lead the team. I'm constantly trying to decipher conversations happening at a level beyond me. His honesty was unexpected. Then why stay? Fear, he said simply. Fear of admitting I made the wrong choice. Fear of what comes next. Same reason most people stay in situations that make them unhappy. His words struck deeper than he could. No. Was fear what had kept me at Meridian all these years? Fear of the unknown, of starting over, of discovering that perhaps I wasn't as valuable elsewhere as I'd believed? We talked for another hour, not as rivals, but as 2 professionals, caught in the same broken system. Jason admitted he'd been considering resigning even before the Morrison incident. I shared Rebecca's offer with him and he encouraged me to take it. Meridian won't change, he said as we parted. Daniel built it in his image, and that image will always value perception over substance. The rest of Saturday passed in quiet contemplation. I cleaned my apartment thoroughly, something I'd neglected for months. I called friends I hadn't spoken to in weeks. I ordered takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and actually sat at the table to eat it instead of hunching over my laptop. Simple actions that felt radical in their normalcy. Sunday brought rain, gentle and persistent. I spent the morning reviewing my finances. 7 years of solid income with minimal expenses had left me with considerable savings. I could afford to take risks now. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. In the afternoon, I drove to my parents' house for dinner, something I'd been postponing for too long. My father, retired now after 30 years as an engineer at the same company, listened intently as I explained my situation. "Sounds like you've already made your decision," he said when I finished. "You just want permission to make it." "Maybe," I admitted. "It feels ungrateful to leave after all they've invested in me." My father's laugh was gentle but firm. "That's backwards thinking, Sarah. They invested in you because of what you could do for them, not out of charity, and you've more than repaid that investment with 7 years of your life." My mother, ever practical, asked the question I'd been avoiding. "If you leave Meridian, will you take the Morrison offer or look for something else entirely?" I stared, out at the rain-slicked garden where I'd played as a child. "I don't know yet. Morrison would be the easier path, but maybe easy isn't what I need right now." Later, as I was leaving, my father pressed a small object into my hand, a brass compass worn with age. "Your grandfather gave me this when I was starting out," he explained. When he handed it to me, he said something I never forgot. "No matter where your career takes you, the most important direction is forward." I closed my fingers around the compass, feeling its weight, not just of metal, but of generations of choices and changes. Driving home through the rain-washed streets, I realized that the anxiety that had been churning inside me since Friday had settled into something else: determination. The question was no longer whether to leave Meridian, but how to leave it on my own terms. I parked outside my apartment building but didn't go inside immediately. Instead, I took out my phone and composed 2 emails. The first was to Rebecca, at Morrison, thanking her for the opportunity and requesting a formal meeting on Tuesday to discuss possibilities. The second was to Daniel, brief and professional, asking for a meeting first thing Monday morning before the rest of the team arrived. As I pressed send on both messages, the rain finally stopped. Somewhere behind the breaking clouds, stars were emerging, invisible now but constant in their presence. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, the decision was made. Whatever came next, I would face it standing firmly in my own worth. Monday arrived with uncharacteristic sunshine for late autumn. I dressed with care, not in my usual jeans and company hoodie, but in a charcoal suit I reserved for client meetings. The subtle armor of professional attire felt appropriate for the conversation ahead. The office was quiet when I arrived at 7:30. Just a few early risers hunched over their monitors with coffee cups already half empty. I nodded to them but didn't stop to chat, heading directly to my desk to prepare my thoughts. Daniel's response to my email had been brief. 7:45 works, my office. No pleasantries, no questions. He knew as well as I did that something fundamental had shifted. At exactly 7:45, I knocked on his door. "Come in," he called, voice artificially bright. He was reviewing spreadsheets when I entered, the performance of busyness I'd seen him enact countless times before client meetings or board presentations. He looked up, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Sarah, good weekend?" The question was perfunctory, his eyes already assessing my formal attire with growing wariness. "Clarifying," I replied, taking a seat. "I've made some decisions I wanted to discuss with you before the team arrives." He leaned back, abandoning the spreadsheet pretense. "I'm glad to hear that. I've been thinking too, and I realize we need to reconsider your position here. How would you feel about leading a new innovation division? Full autonomy, better compensation, direct reporting to me." The offer might have tempted me before, but now it rang hollow. A hasty concession meant to placate rather than rectify. "I appreciate the gesture," I said, maintaining eye contact. But I've decided to resign from Meridian, effective 2 weeks from today. His expression barely flickered, just a slight tightening around the eyes that someone who hadn't spent 7 years observing him might have missed. I see. May I ask where you're going? I have options I'm exploring, I replied deliberately, vague. I'll make a final decision this week. He nodded slowly. Morrison, I assume. That's one possibility, I acknowledged. But my decision to leave isn't about where I'm going. It's about recognizing that my growth here has reached its limit. Sarah. His tone shifted to the persuasive cadence he used to close difficult deals. We both know you're invaluable to this company. Whatever Morrison is offering, we can match it. If it's about the CTO position, we can discuss a timeline. It's not about titles or money, I interrupted, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. It's about respect, about acknowledging contributions fairly, about creating an environment where talent is recognized regardless of who delivers it or how they look. He flinched slightly at the implicit accusation. If this is about the presentation, it's about a pattern, I said. The presentation was just the moment I finally saw it clearly. Daniel sighed, dropping the mask of corporate affability. You know, business isn't always fair, Sarah. Sometimes decisions are made based on factors beyond technical merit. That's reality. I understand that perfectly well, I replied. And that's exactly why I'm leaving. I'm choosing not to participate in a system that devalues my work while benefiting from it. He studied me for a long moment. You've changed. I've woken up, I corrected. There's a difference. The early morning light cast long shadows across his desk as silence stretched between us. Finally, he reached for a legal pad and pen. 2 weeks then, he said, all business now. I'll need you to document everything on the Morrison project and train whoever takes over. I've already started compiling documentation, I said, and I'll ensure whoever inherits the project is fully prepared. He looked up, a question forming. The contract hasn't been signed yet. If you're meeting with Morrison, I won't interfere. With Meridian's business, I assured him. Whatever decision I make about my future, I'll handle it ethically. The relief on his face was quickly replaced by calculation. We should discuss your current projects and transition plan. The Morrison implementation is just the beginning. They're already talking about Phase 2, and your expertise will no longer be available after 2 weeks. I finished for him. Which is precisely what happens when you fail to value the people who build your success. The bluntness of my statement hung in the air between us. 7 years ago, I would never have spoken to him this way. Even last week, I would have softened my words, padded them with apologies and qualifications. Not today. Daniel leaned forward, abandoning his relaxed posture. Let me be candid, Sarah. Your departure will significantly impact this company. The Morrison contract alone represents 20% of our projected revenue for next year. If you leave now, in the middle of implementation, it could jeopardize everything we've worked for. Everything you've worked for. The implied threat was clear. Stay, or be responsible for damaging the company. Once that would have worked, the weight of responsibility would have crushed my resolve. That's precisely why I'm giving 2 weeks' notice rather than walking out today, I replied, calmly. I built this system. I understand better than anyone what's at stake. But Meridian's future success can't continue to rely on my willingness to accept less than I'm worth. He studied me, reassessing. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its manipulative edge. You really are leaving, aren't you? Yes. A knock at the door interrupted us. Jason poked his head in, already dressed for the Morrison contract signing scheduled for that afternoon. Sorry to interrupt, he said, glancing between us. Daniel, the legal team needs to review a clause in the contract before the Morrison meeting. Daniel nodded, visibly shifting back into CEO mode. We'll continue this discussion later, he told me. In the meantime, I'd appreciate your discretion. The team doesn't need to know about your decision until we've had a chance to prepare for the transition. I stood, smoothing my jacket. I'll tell my direct reports today. They deserve to hear it from me, not through office gossip. The rest of the company can wait until we've agreed on a communication plan. As I turned to leave, Daniel called my name once more. When I looked back, something almost like respect had crept into his expression. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you would have made an excellent CTO." The acknowledgement, coming far too late, felt both vindicating and deeply sad. "I know," I replied simply and closed the door behind me. The 2 weeks that followed passed in a blur of documentation, knowledge transfer, and quiet goodbyes. Word of my resignation spread through the company like wildfire, despite Daniel's attempts to control the narrative. My team was stunned. Several cried during our private meeting where I broke the news, but most understood once I explained my reasons, carefully edited to remove the most damning details. Jason resigned 3 days after I did, much to Daniel's visible frustration. He accepted a position at a smaller startup, stepping back from the executive track to return to hands-on development. "Thanks for the wake-up call," he told me over lunch during my final week. "Sometimes the ladder you're climbing is against the wrong wall." Rebecca's offer from Morrison remained open, with increasingly attractive terms, as the reality of my departure from Meridian sank in. The position would be senior, the compensation generous, the technical challenges engaging. By all objective measures, it was the logical next step. Yet something held me back from accepting immediately. During our Tuesday meeting, Rebecca had casually mentioned Morrison's work hard, play hard culture, with 60-hour weeks being the norm during implementation phases. She'd described it as the cost of excellence with such conviction that I could tell she truly believed it. 7 years ago, I would have nodded along eagerly. Today, those words triggered a quiet alarm. I'd already sacrificed enough evenings, weekends, and personal milestones on that particular altar. My last day at Meridian arrived with unexpected emotional weight. I'd spent a third of my adult life within these walls, building systems and relationships that had shaped my professional identity. Despite everything, leaving felt like shedding a skin I'd grown accustomed to, even if it no longer fit quite right. My team organized a quiet farewell lunch. They presented me with a custom mechanical keyboard they'd all chipped in to build, each keycap engraved with inside jokes and technical terms we'd shared over the years. I fought back tears as I ran, my fingers over the tactile memento of our work together. "We expect regular updates, Maya," my senior developer said fiercely. "And if wherever you go doesn't appreciate you properly, we'll stage a rescue mission." I laughed, grateful for their loyalty. I think I'm done with places that don't recognize value when they see it. At 5 o'clock, I turned in my badge and laptop to HR. Daniel was conspicuously absent, having scheduled an out-of-office meeting that would keep him away until after my departure. It was cowardly but expected. I left without seeking him out. Outside, the autumn air carried the first hint of winter's chill. I stood on the sidewalk looking up at the building that had consumed so much of my life, feeling strangely light despite the uncertainty ahead. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Decision time. Morrison needs an answer by EOD tomorrow. Ready to join us?" I slipped the phone back into my pocket without responding and began walking. Not toward my apartment, but toward the small park several blocks away where I sometimes ate lunch on rare, beautiful days. I needed space to think, away from screens and expectations. The park was nearly empty as sunset approached. I found a bench overlooking a small pond and sat, watching ducks glide across the darkening water. My grandfather's compass was in my jacket pocket, a comforting weight against my side. 2 paths stretched before me. Morrison with its prestige and challenges, but the same demanding culture I'd just left. Or something entirely new, undefined and risky, but potentially more aligned with the person I was becoming. My phone buzzed. Again. Not Rebecca this time, but an email from a contact I'd reached out to last week, a former colleague who'd left Meridian years ago to found a technology education nonprofit focused on bringing coding skills to underserved communities. "We should talk," her message read. "I've been looking for someone to lead our technical curriculum development. Lower salary than corporate, but sane hours and work that matters. Coffee tomorrow? I smiled at the synchronicity. The universe offering a third path I hadn't fully considered. As twilight deepened around me, I took out the compass and held it in my palm, watching the needle swing toward north with unerring certainty. Forward, my grandfather had said. The most important direction is forward. But forward didn't necessarily mean climbing higher on the same ladder. It meant movement aligned with personal truth, whatever direction that might take. I composed 2 replies before leaving the park. To Rebecca, thank you for the opportunity, but I've decided to explore a different direction. I'd be happy to recommend some exceptional engineers from my team who could help with the implementation. To my former colleague, coffee sounds perfect. I have some ideas about curriculum development I'd love to discuss. The weight of decision lifted, I walked home through streets beginning to sparkle with early evening lights. For the first time in years, tomorrow wasn't mapped out in meetings and deliverables. The blank space felt not like a void, but like a canvas. That night I dreamed of open roads and unexplored paths. I woke before dawn, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table with a notebook, plotting the architecture of a new system. Not of code this time, but of a life built around value rather than validation. The Morrison Project would succeed without me. Meridian would continue its corporate dance without me. The work I'd done would remain, supporting structures I no longer needed to maintain. Meanwhile, I would take the lessons of the past 7 years, technical expertise certainly, but also newfound clarity about my worth, and apply them to something that aligned with the person I'd become. My phone rang just after 9, my former colleague eager to start our conversation earlier than planned. I hope you don't mind the early call, she said when I answered. I couldn't wait to talk about the possibilities. I smiled, looking out at the morning sun illuminating a city that suddenly seemed full of potential. Neither could I replied. I'm ready to begin.